Last night, we heard from Donald Trump at the State of the Union. His main financial benefactor, Elon Musk, spent more than $277 million to try to get him elected, the most ever spent by any individual on a campaign in the nation's history. Look, our country's a democracy, not an oligarchy, and it shouldn't be for sale. But today, we're going to have a long form conversation about probably the leading decision that's affected how we fund elections, the Citizens United decision, with one of the best experts. But first, we're going to have a quick question for Shalonda Young, the former director of the Office of Management and Budget for Joe Biden. And then we're going to have that longer conversation with Tiffany Muller. She's the head of End Citizens United, an organization whose primary goal is to reform campaign finance laws, and boy, do we ever need that. I bet after you listen to that, you're going to want to work to help End Citizens United as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's program. I'm here today with Shalonda Young, who was the OMB director for Joe Biden and was a longtime staff director for Democrats on the Appropriations Committee where I serve. And Shalonda, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Shalonda, so I have the question I ask everyone is, if you had the ability to change one federal law, what would that one federal law be? You like that I gave you no advance notice?
Oh my goodness, you gave me no advance.
I want people to just kind of give that spontaneous sort of answer that comes out of them, not one that, well, section whatever of whatever needs to be, have a different percentage.
The problem is, Mark, you know where people's brains are. I go straight to, I wasn't old enough to retire when I left the federal government.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't 50 yet and a few years shy of that, even though I have the years, I guess the law says I cannot get health insurance at separation. So my first thing is like, can we change that and not have a youth penalty?
That's good. That's good. I like that. That works.
Policy wise, child, I have a 3-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when I had her, I did my taxes. We aren't doing enough for families.
Yeah.
We have got to do a bigger child tax credit. We just have to.
Agree.
And when I worked in the government, I would not say that because government workers, I did better than a lot of American people, but I will tell you it was a struggle, for our family. And you pay all this money out for childcare. Mm-hmm. They cost money just to have. And you see these tax credits and you're like, when were these last updated?
Yeah.
And it was really disappointing. We couldn't get the child tax credit redone. But not just child tax credit. We need to help families with affordable child care. This is just not sustainable. So I really hope we increase the help for families in that space.
And you were instrumental in doing the child tax credit, working with the Biden administration with the Build Back Better agenda. And we tried to do it with child care.
We tried.
And
it's a problem. Yeah, families can't go on this way.
Yeah, we won't mention a couple senators' names on that. But thanks so much for being with us, Shalonda. Really appreciate it. Welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. For many people, myself included, many of the problems that we see in how government operates and passes legislation can be traced back to how we fund our campaigns. And big money speaks volumes, but that's not the way our founders ever intended or ever could have imagined we would be going as a country. And many people think that the single biggest problem in this area stems from a court decision called Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. Essentially, that decision allowed big and dark money into our campaigns in a very unregulated way, saying that money was free speech, essentially. And that decision has cost us mightily. So our guest this week is someone that is an expert in this area as the president of End Citizens United and Let America Vote. Tiffany Muller has helped grow the group to more than 4 million members. Wow, and 1 million grassroots donors. And since their founding in 2015, they've worked to protect and strengthen democracy across the country and elect more than 600 democracy champions.
Yes.
Congratulations on that. That's awesome. She began her career in government and politics as the first openly gay elected public official in Kansas, 2004, a member of the Topeka City Council. And she's been named to Washingtonians' list of the most influential people in Washington. I didn't know that, Tiffany.
You didn't know that? It's a whole thing. And apparently it comes out every May, and they list the people who have influence in our public policy.
Oh.
And I somehow got on this list, and I'm so humbled and amazed by it every time I see it.
Did you get a t-shirt?
No, but I need one, don't you think?
Yeah, I know. They should give you something, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
they keep offering me a plaque,
But
but
that's cool.
yeah, but a t-shirt would be better, because
Yeah.
then I could wear it around and
I know.
kind of
I know.
brag about it.
Yeah, maybe you get, a little better table at a restaurant.
I like that. I like that. And it is in the category of good government, which just screams sexy topic.
Yes. Well, and as you could probably tell, I've known Tiffany for a long time. So she actually helped me when I first ran for Congress.
right.
And thank you for that. So that was my for full disclosure.
That
part.
was your full
Yeah,
disclosure.
I wanted to put that down here because
No,
we've been.
your listeners should know that actually on the day of your primary, we not only were knocking doors together, but then we took a little break, an unauthorized break from knocking doors to go eat some Thai food.
Yeah, but don't tell it when we took a break because I will get in such trouble for doing that.
That was a long time ago.
Long time ago. It's all safe. Anyway, well, thank you. And this is a big subject to talk about, right? I'll tell you, when we put out social media about Citizens United, the organic response, and by organic, I mean not driven from an organization, just people are like outraged by what it's done to public policy. People always reply and they always have comments. And am I right when I say that this is one of those mega issues that if it were resolved, we could lessen so many of the bad decisions that government officials make for special interests? Is that a fair way of describing this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the gridlock and dysfunction in our government in almost every single issue can be traced back to the money in politics. And so whether it is lowering prescription drug prices, well, you can trace the gridlock and the difficulty getting that done, something that, 85, 90% of Americans want, back to the fact that Big Pharma is one of the biggest spenders, spends about $300 million every election cycle. And guess what? They have 1,500 lobbyists on Capitol Hill every single day. That is 3 for every member of Congress.
I think it's about 10% of all the lobbyists in this town are Big Pharma.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Like, if you look at issues like climate change, right? Before Citizens United, there were 14 different instances of Senate Republicans joining with Senate Democrats to try to address this issue. And we were just one vote from passing cap and trade and from actually making some real progress on this. And then Citizens United happened, and big oil and gas became the #1 spender in our elections.
Wow.
And since that time, there have been 0 instances of Senate Republicans joining with Senate Democrats to try to address this. If you look at, gun violence and trying to address the epidemic of gun violence in this country, you can look at really every single issue, including reproductive freedom and the decisions that this court has made, and you can trace it all back to the money in politics. And what we've seen, so Citizens United was decided 15 years ago.
Yeah, let's you start at the very beginning, explaining what that decision is and why people should care about that decision.
So 15 years ago, the Supreme Court said it took this was actually a pretty narrow case, and it made this really awful decision, right? And it basically took 2 really terrible ideas and it merged them together. And it said money equals speech, and corporations are people.
Yeah.
And it put a for sale sign on our democracy, right? And what we've seen since that time is this flood of unlimited and undisclosed money flooding into our elections. And, we warned then that what would happen is that our elections would start to be controlled not by the people whose vote is supposed to matter, but by the people who could write the biggest check. And that is absolutely what's happened. And I think the American people know that. I think they feel like they are being left out. I think they feel like the system's working just fine for those at the top, but not working for them and not working for their lives. And they're absolutely right. So in 2024, there was $20 billion spent in our elections. $20
The B.
billion.
You're saying with a B.
B.
In case
With a
people
B.
aren't hearing it right.
With a
Okay.
B. And now we are seeing the full culmination of this decision to where it's not only that these biggest donors are buying our elections, they're now buying control of our government, right? So there are 13 billionaires that have been nominated to this cabinet
Yeah.
in this administration. You have Elon Musk, who is the richest man in the world and who just donated the most ever to a candidate.
We'll talk about him
I'm
separately in a
sure
little
we're
bit.
going to. Who's now got this huge job with tons of power. And what we see is this massive conflict of interest, right? And really a system that is now serving themselves and their wealthy friends and the biggest special interest and hurting Americans.
So explain a little more. Money is free speech and corporations are people.
Yeah.
Explain the fundamental problem of that as basically as possible.
Well, what I always love is that when I say this to people out across the country as I travel around, they're like, corporations aren't people,
Right.
right?
That should be a no-brainer.
I mean, that should be a no-brainer. They don't, a corporation can go on after the death of a founder, right?
Right.
It kind of goes on in perpetuity. Corporations can't, get married. Corporations, but what the Supreme Court said was that corporations have the same free speech rights as an individual,
Okay.
right? Except that corporations have a massive amount of funds and PACs and influence. And we had actually, because of the undue influence and access that corporations had had in our system back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, we'd actually kept corporate money out of our politics for 100 years until this decision. Because we know they had plenty of megaphone up here anyway. And so what we've seen, though, now, since Citizens United, is hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars being spent by corporations who are looking for things like deregulations on things like pollution standards, maybe are looking for lower tax rates, right? Are looking for ways to pad their profit. And almost all of those come at the expense of the American people. And then the other thing that this did is it basically said that a person, an individual, a corporation, a group could spend unlimited amounts of money in elections. And before this, there had actually been limitations on
And there still are limitations on individuals.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Unless they want to go fund a super PAC, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it shouldn't be the richer you are, the more free speech you get.
Except that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. And when you talk to, an everyday American out there and you say, do they think that they're going to have the same access to their member of Congress as someone who wrote a really big check? They're like, no, of course not. So they understand that right now our democracy, which is supposed to be based on one person, one vote, and is supposed to represent everyone, is actually right now just representing the people who have the most money. And I don't know, it impacts every single part of our democracy, our governance, and the outcomes for people. And it makes me so angry because that's not the way our country was built and how it's supposed to operate.
I'm just glad they didn't go one extra step and instead of voting, they just put us on eBay, right? Highest bidder. I mean, it works that way, but it might have been a little more efficient.
We've had a lot of people joke that members of Congress who are getting all this money should wear patches like NASCAR drivers,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Right? And you know this. I mean, too many folks up here are doing the bidding of a lot of their big donors or a lot of the corporations. And
no question. I mean, there's no question that having more money involved in campaigns gives you more access to elected officials, not just in Congress, state legislatures, local government. there's no question about that. And looking at you started mentioning a little bit of the scope of what we spent in the last election.
Yeah.
But talk a little more about that and compare it historically, because I think if I understand it right, isn't it something like we could track 75% of campaign money prior to Citizens United? So in other words, who's spending money on campaigns, so you
Yep.
knew where their interests were. But now it's like 25% we can track and 75% you don't know who's actually spending it. Can you just
Yeah.
talk about the web of this money?
So, they're in the Citizens United decision, not to get all Supreme Court geeky again, but there was this assumption made by the court that we would have disclosure and transparency into who was funding campaigns and who was funding efforts to influence elections, because that helps root out corruption and conflicts of interest, and would help make sure that the American people at least understood who was funding these efforts, so that you could hold members and candidates accountable to that. Right. So prior to the Citizens United decision, about 75% of the money you could trace back to the original source. You could actually see where it was going. And, we thought the 25% was bad. We need full disclosure and transparency. But now, since this decision, you are absolutely right. It's actually flipped. It is inverse. It is now 75% of the money is what they call dark money
Yeah.
or gray money, meaning you can't trace it back to where it actually started from. And a lot of this is because it's being funneled from a one organization to another organization to an organization that's spending an election. So they're literally using a shell game so that you can't actually find the initial donor.
Can you give me an example? If you got one off the top of your head, it'd just be,
I mean, we can take Elon Musk.
Okay. Yeah.
We know that he gave $270 million to a super PAC he ended up running, right? All spent to elect Donald Trump. But before he came out so publicly am I right?
Sorry, we'll start that again. You're sniffling an awful lot, so I don't know if it's going to affect things. You know what? Part of it is because you're looking down. I know what happens. If you look more up, you'll do it less. So I'll start with the give me an example again part, and we'll do that. So, all right. Okay.
All right.
All right. So give me an example of when you're talking about that, how the money is kind of hidden.
Yeah. So there are a few good examples, but let's take Elon Musk.
Okay.
He spent $270 or $75 million to help elect Donald Trump. And he did it through a super PAC, so we know he gave that money. But before he was out publicly for Donald Trump, he spent tens of millions of dollars. We're not even going to be able to track all of it through other organizations to help influence the election and to help elect Donald Trump. But we can't even trace that back because it'll go from a big donor to a group with a innocuous name, Americans for a Better America, or something, right?
Yeah.
And then to a super PAC, Americans Love Puppies or something like that. And so you don't actually see the original donator.
Gotcha.
You see the middle group, right? This happens a lot with a group like Americans for Prosperity. Americans for Prosperity, quite a name, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't we all like more
That sounds
prosperity?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Help me
Except this is the Koch brothers.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, exactly. And so they want less regulation from the EPA because they want to be able to pollute more. They want to destroy the federal government. They want to destroy unions. And they give a bunch of their political money to influence elections through their group called Americans for Prosperity. But you can't actually tell who's giving the original money. But they're pretty out front about that one. APAC spent $100 million to influence primary elections this year. And we can't trace all of that money back.
I'm going to ask you more about that.
Okay, good, good. I mean, we know that it is a large swath of Republican conservative mega donors, but we can't trace it all completely back. So that is what we've been seeing. Crypto, the same, right? And we see these massive interests who are come up with these innocuous sounding groups that voters don't know anything about, and you can't actually go trace who it is.
Yeah. So let me go through a couple of these terms because we've used some
I'm sure.
lingo
Yeah,
that I want
use
to
the little lingo.
explain a little bit for folks, right? Because so let's do explain a little bit about what a super PAC is. What's an independent expenditure? That sounds innocuous. What is dark money? You started to talk about that. And if there's any other language you think that needs explanation, just to help folks understand.
All right. So let's start with just a political action committee.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. A PAC. Political Action Committee is a PAC, and a PAC is an organization that is working in elections to help elect people. And Citizens United is a PAC.
Yeah.
We are a PAC made up of grassroots members across the country who are all trying to counterbalance the force of big money by coming together. And it's a bunch of small dollar donors and members who want to help elect people who are actually going to put our democracy first.
Labor unions.
Labor unions
right?
are PACs. There are environmental groups that are
Yeah.
PACs. Okay, so that's a PAC.
Yep.
And in traditional sense, there were always limitations on what they could spend, what they could give, and what they could take in from a donor.
Yeah.
Okay. Super PACs.
That's when you get bit by a spider, right? Oh, no. Okay.
No. Although I like that.
Yeah.
And I wish that was
Yeah.
true because that would be far more fun.
All right.
A super PAC doesn't have any limitations on what they can spend to help elect a candidate, and doesn't have any limitations on what they can take from a donor.
How do they
okay.
get super then?
That is how they say they get super, is by super big money.
Oh,
So let's say I want to help elect Mark Pocan.
Yeah.
Because I do. I want to be really clear. If I'm a regular PAC, I can take from a donor, I can take up to $5,000, and I can give you to your reelection efforts $5,000. Okay. If I am a super PAC,
Yeah.
I can go find a donor to give me $250,000
Whoa.
or $200 million.
Whoa.
And I can go spend any amount of money to help elect you that I want. Now, the key of this is that it is supposed to be independent. That means you are not supposed to know about it. You're not supposed to be able to help direct any part of it. We're not supposed to be able to communicate at all about it.
I'm sure that works perfectly.
Don't you think that probably works perfectly? I mean, I'm guessing that Elon Musk and his 275 million was perfectly independent from the Trump campaign.
Nothing to do
Right?
with it. Well, so a quick example. On people's political websites, isn't there a special area people put just for these PACs to find out where to grab a picture or a logo
Yes.
or messaging, which is against the law, but they just kind of put it out there, and often you don't even find it unless you know how to look for it.
That is true. It's
right?
called a red box.
Red box,
There's
yeah.
special lingo for it.
I think Jill Takuda has a bill to
She
get rid of those, and I think we
does.
signed on to it.
And it
Not we're
used
going to.
to be called a red box because it used to be in a red box
Yeah.
at the top of the website. Now it's normally hidden a little bit. And sometimes you'll see it's only posted on a Substack, right? That only some people know about.
Yeah.
But because it was published, it's considered public. So you'll see kind of these loopholes,
Yeah.
right? So, okay, so that is PAC and Super PAC.
Okay.
And Citizens United basically opened the door for Super PACs to exist. They didn't exist before Citizens United.
All right.
So the very first election cycle where Super PACs even came into existence was 2012.
Wow.
So we've had
recent.
It is pretty
Yeah.
recent. It is pretty recent. Okay, so that's a super PAC. Dark money. Dark money is just money where it's not fully disclosed and transparent who gave the money.
Kind of the examples you gave with
Some of the examples that
the Elon Musk money. here.
exactly passing it through typically a 501c4 nonprofit organization that doesn't have to disclose donors to hide the source of those donors.
Gotcha. So using essentially the text code to
Yes.
Make your money more anonymous and impossible to track.
That's exactly right. And
Exactly as our founders had intended.
that obviously it's all a shell game,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And we know that transparency and disclosure is actually how we root out corruption. And so now that we see so much more dark money,
Yeah.
undisclosed money, we know that there is foreign money coming into our elections. We know that there is corruption happening. We know that there is conversations happening that definitely should not be happening. Something we haven't talked about yet, but I will just put a little pin in it,
Yeah.
is there was supposed to be a cop on the beat to enforce these laws, right? Which is the Federal Elections Commission, which
Yeah.
was formed after the Watergate scandal, after Nixon and the Watergate scandal. They've been around 50 years. And the problem is that the Federal Elections Commission has become gridlocked, dysfunctional, and as a matter of fact, right now they're bragging about deregulating campaign finance
Oh,
law.
God. Yeah.
Right? They're actually making the problem of big money worse, rather than holding folks accountable. So, so often what you see is people break the law knowing that maybe they get a slap on the wrist for it, but it's not going to happen till far after the election, so it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, but when that corporation has to go to jail.
Wait.
Wait,
Do
that doesn't-
corporations go?
No, I don't know. Could we do maybe we should have like a Matrix virtual jail and their website has to go in or something. Like that's what we're doing right now, right? With Donald Trump. I think we're like taking, oh, well, all right. Who are
Only people go to jail. But wait, I thought corporations were people.
I know.
It's so
Oh,
yeah.
I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
All right. You started to mention a few, but who are some of the biggest offenders out there? Americans for Prosperity.
Americans
Koch
for
brothers.
Prosperity.
Yeah.
That's the Koch brothers, right? You have Richard Uihlein in good old Wisconsin, right?
Yes, my home state.
Your home state, who helps fund a couple of different groups. You have Peter Thiel, who's a big Republican mega donor.
Is he founder of PayPal, was it? Or what is his background? I don't know.
Yes, it's one
Rich
of
guy.
rich guy, who also helps fund some of these groups, and they all have like kind of similar sounding
Didn't
names.
JD Vance work for him?
He did.
His
He
only
did.
job outside of
And basically Peter Thiel bankrolled that Senate campaign.
I'm shocked.
Yeah,
This is my shocked face. They can't tell on radio, but or on podcast, but this is my
it's your shocked voice.
Yes,
so
that's
they
it.
can tell.
There, I did a gasp. Good. All right.
You also see though, you see some big corporations using it, right? And you see crypto, you see industries definitely coming together to use this. So you see crypto is one of the biggest ones from this past cycle. I think they ended up spending $100 million, maybe more. And their goal is pretty simple. They want to make sure that crypto is either not regulated or only lightly regulated in the way that they want. And, now that we have a president who's selling
Crypto coins.
I'm sure that we're going to like really crack down on crypto. And then the other big one that came up in this election cycle was APAC. And
I'm gonna save that one for a little bit.
we're still saving it.
I know. I
I
got
feel like you're just
That's one that I want to talk about a little more than usual, but I want to
we're
get
like
to
that Hansel and Gretel story. We're just gonna leave breadcrumbs to it. And at the end, you open the cabinet.
Well, it's because they're entering a new area of problems. But anyway, all right.
Okay. So those are a few of them, and like I said, U.S. Chamber of Commerce does a lot of dark money as well, and they're normally they normally get their money through big corporations or trade associations. They're supposed to be the more reasonable corporate spending, but it all still goes to the same place. They're all still electing election deniers and folks who are falling in line with all the big corruption we're seeing.
I was going to ask you about Elon Musk, but I think you explained most of how he moved his money around, right? Because I just find it interesting right now. He's become a special government employee status where a member of Congress can't have a federal contract.
Right.
And most every federal employee can't have a federal contract, especially if it's under the area that they can move money. But we've just made Elon Musk, who has had $20 billion in federal contracts, $3 billion right now, in charge of the levers of turning on and off the spigots of money in federal agencies,
Yep.
which is huge corruption, but he paid for it.
He did pay for it. That's
Yeah.
exactly what has happened. I mean, this is the thing. Citizens United used to just pay for elections, and now it's paying for government positions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's not Elon Musk, I think, is the biggest example of it.
Mhm.
And what we're seeing, I mean, look, they've already said there's no ethics rules that he falls under,
Yeah.
that he is himself responsible for self-policing whether or not he has a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
He's shutting down USAID, partially because he was being investigated
Yes.
by USAID,
Yeah.
right? Going after other agencies where there was already a clear conflict, right? He went after FAA because he was being fined
Yeah.
from FAA. Every single thing that he's doing is a vendetta and or a conflict. He shut down the continuing resolution
Thank
to
you.
keep government funded because it was going to crack down on business in China because Tesla makes so much of their product in China. So we're seeing this massive, back in the Gilded Age, we called these folks robber barons,
Yes.
right?
Fighting Bob La Follette from Wisconsin, a former U.S. senator. That was one of his big things, was fighting the robber barons, back then. Yeah.
And really, I think it's such a good word because it is about stealing from the American people to just hoard it all in a small group of people. And Elon Musk is central to this, but he's not the only one, right? Dr. Oz.
Yes.
Ugh, Dr. Oz. He's getting ready to run Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
With all that background he has.
With all that background.
On TV.
Exactly. He has $56 million of investments in businesses that have business in front of CMS.
Well, surely he's going to divest.
Oh, of course. Of course. Or how about the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, right? This one is one of my favorites. Every single thing he's going to do as Treasury Secretary impacts the value of our currency, the value of the US dollar, right? So it will shock you. I want to hear the shocked voice again that he has $150 million of a bet, open positions right now on the value of the dollar that he's not divesting from.
Wow.
Right. $150 million for his own pocket. Where's your shocked voice?
Well, I was more thinking if he's got a crypto coin named after him. Or maybe you can't. If the president has it, no one else can have a crypto coin named after them because that's going to get a little bit in the ego land. All right.
And the thing that they did on day one that got buried, I mean, so much, but he signed all that flurry of executive orders. One of them rescinded the executive branch ethics. So for the first time, we are operating without executive branch ethics right now, right?
Yeah.
And these are things like disclosure, transparency, stopping the revolving door between the lobbyist and government or between business and government, making sure that folks weren't being paid these huge amounts of money to work in the government and then go work at the business. All of that was, he signed an order to just get rid of all that.
One of my neighbors today back home texted me, we have to quit referring to ethnic cleansing, start referring to ethics cleansing.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's what they're doing. Yeah.
That's exactly what they are. They're just getting rid of all of it.
All right, now we're gonna finally get to that breadcrumb.
Oh, breadcrumb. It's like the Hansel and Gretel story, really.
Well, everything we've talked about so far has predominantly happened in the area of general elections.
Yes.
Right? So the November election or an April election, but not a primary. However, primary elections, much less money is spent overall
That's true.
than a general election. But recently, a few groups, and you've mentioned a couple of them, have started getting involved in primary elections. One of those groups is AIPAC, and you started to mention that. But what I find especially interesting about that is they're getting involved often in Democratic primary elections, yet almost all of their donors are big Republican donors. So it's kind of like a Trojan horse coming into a primary election and then spending money in Democratic primaries to tell Democrats who they should vote for, and yet they almost never mention any issue that AIPAC actually is about or works on. AIPAC is an issue that um, uh, essentially advocates for a more conservative position on Israel. I think that's probably the most fair way to describe what they are. Can you talk about that? Because I'm really worried that if, it's tough enough when the big money comes into these general elections, but if you start doing it in primaries, I've seen primaries where $4 million, which is chump change in a congressional race in the general, buys a primary election. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, what we saw over the last 2 cycles, but in particular this past cycle, was crypto and APAC really making this huge play in Democratic primaries to get folks who were um,
They would say pro-Israel.
they would say pro-Israel, or maybe more conservative on regulations around crypto, maybe more hesitant to regulate crypto. And sometimes they were
And
working
that's a different organization doing
different
that, right? Yeah,
organization,
yeah.
and sometimes they were actually working together in these primaries.
Mhm.
Sometimes it was different
You
primaries.
can you do that in
Uh,
the super PAC?
they
Talk to
they
the super
can
PACs? Okay, they can.
they
Okay.
can.
All right.
Yeah, because of course they never talk to the
Candidate,
candidates.
ever.
Yeah, so they of course just knew these positions.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
without talking to these candidates. I'm sure everyone believes that,
Yeah.
right?
All right.
The shocked voice again.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen is that in some of these very uh, safe Democratic House seats, we've seen 10, 20, even more
Yeah.
millions of dollars being spent.
Yeah. This year it was a couple with what, 10 or 20 million.
Yeah, there was. And
Primaries.
primaries in places where these districts were going to be decided basically in the primary
Mhm.
election because they were
St. Louis, New York City.
that's
couple
exactly right.
examples. Yep.
That's exactly right. And they did it for I think a couple of reasons. One, they wanted to prove that they could, right?
Yeah.
2, they wanted to knock off people who were more skeptical of their position, right? Who maybe were more progressive on Middle East policies or who were for regulations of crypto. But I also think that it was all about sending a message, right? It's really about scaring off other people,
We can do this to you
and we will.
because we have the money.
That's
and we
right.
will. Yeah.
And we will. And so I really think that it's not just about you're right, like Cory Bush in St. Louis, Missouri, which was one of the primaries that they went in and played in and spent a ton of money and won that primary. It's also about the message that they're sending to other people. Don't be outspoken about this. Don't take this stance or we're going to come after you. And that's another problem with this big money in politics is that it no longer is about what you think or what your voters think. It's about the threat of all this money that's being spent, right? And APAC and crypto are the latest and biggest examples, and I think it's very problematic that they are spending so much money in Democratic primaries. They're definitely not the only examples. Like big oil and gas has done this successfully on the Republican side where they've said, don't talk about climate change ever. Don't admit that it exists or we're going to come primary you.
Yeah.
Right?
At this year's Democratic Convention, a defense contractor, I'll leave it at that, someone who works for one told me, oh yeah, we're going to start getting involved in primaries. Because they're all realizing that a little bit of money in a primary goes a lot longer.
Yep.
But it's Trojan horse money often. It's not money Democratic donors giving to Democratic candidates. It's that outside money.
That's
But
right.
I just
So so the question then becomes, what do we do? Right? And there are things we can do and there are things we should do. And so you didn't ask me, but I'm gonna
No, please. I don't. I think I was going there.
because it can feel so it can really feel so hopeless that just these folks who have this $100 million account, and they're just going to go write a $10 million check and buy congressional seats, right? With, to your point, money that is really opposite of where the district is at and where the voters are at. And so I think number one, disclosure and transparency. The more that money can be traced back, the more that we see that that money goes away, right? And so the more that it can be called out and traced back directly to where it's coming from,
Like it was prior to
like it was
Citizens
prior to
United. Yeah.
Citizens United. And, you've been a longtime sponsor of the Disclose Act, which would also force these C4 organizations, 501c4 organizations, to disclose their donors if they're spending in
Yes.
elections,
Yep.
right? And so we can start doing more disclosure and transparency. Now, the Republicans have blocked it every time it's
Mhm.
been up because they think that the big money benefits them.
Right.
And so but we know the voters are with us, and so we need to make sure we have the right people in office so that we can pass that. And that's number one. Number two, I think that there are even some things within campaigns that we've seen work in some places.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know that it's going to work everywhere, but in some places we've seen people's pledges work.
Yeah.
And the People's Pledge is basically an agreement between primary candidates who say, look, if a group comes in and spends on your behalf, you have to basically pay a penalty of 25% of your campaign dollars,
Mhm.
right? You have to give it to charity or you have to, whatever, you
Yeah.
have to do something with it. And that's a big enough penalty. And normally the outside groups don't want to hurt their chosen candidate, that we've actually seen it be really successful and keep money out and keep the race more positive.
Hmm.
Doesn't always work, but it is one of those things that can happen. I think the other thing is that as a party and as an apparatus, we can be calling out the hypocrisy of
Yes.
this much
Okay.
more, right? And demanding that we hold them accountable rather than just, you know, being a wink and a nod okay
Yeah.
with that kind of big money coming in.
The state of Maine, when they used to do public financing, had
Yeah.
that. There was a penalty if someone came in for you, you got more of the public money in your
That's right.
fund to be able to compete against at a disincentive to have big dollars come in. But I think the courts struck that down, if I remember
They
it.
struck down that piece
Yeah,
of
that
it. There,
piece, yeah.
yeah. But public funding works, and we should have it in more places. Right? You should have to go prove that you have the backing of small dollar donors from your community, so that you can
Yeah.
show that you have the backing of the actual people.
Right.
And then what we know is that actually it helps. Also make our elected bodies much more representative. They become more working class because more people can afford to run. Right now, what's the first two questions you get asked if you want to run for Congress?
How much have you raised, or how much can you raise?
How
Right.
much can you
Yeah.
raise, and can you take 2 years off of work
Yeah.
to be able to
Right.
run full time,
Right.
right? So it's why Congress, it has 50% of the people here in Congress are millionaires.
I know. I keep hoping that's going to rub off. It hasn't yet.
Wait, what? And so I think in the places where we've seen, like Maine, they ended up becoming the most blue collar working class legislature in the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause I did a trip when I was in the state legislature with a legislator from Maine, and it was so funny because there was a gentleman who's a Republican from Oklahoma who was in their leadership, and I was kind of in our leadership at the time from the Democrats of Wisconsin. It was around election time. We both were calling back during breaks and finding what was going on, and this person's like, "We don't do that in Maine. We don't have to raise this kind of money.
Yeah.
They just worried about policies
Yeah.
and introducing bills and doing the public good." And it stood out so much when you saw that contrast between two of us from two different parties chasing the same sort of
Yep.
campaigns, and yet then watching that and
Yeah.
just seeing the difference.
We didn't even talk about the fact that that's the other thing is right after you get here,
Yeah.
the first thing you're told
Oh yeah.
is you have to do 30 hours of call time a week in order to be able to raise the money to get reelected,
Yeah.
which means that takes time away from actually writing bills or sitting in hearings or getting to know your colleagues or actually having real policy discussions or doing constituent services. And there's so much pressure on a day-to-day basis to meet these dollar amounts you have to meet, which, as you pointed out, have only been increasing.
Oh, exponentially.
And so it's like, now people get elected, they think they've done the thing. Woohoo, I'm a member of Congress, and the first thing they're told is get back in that call time room, start
Yeah.
dialing for dollars. And so they're calling rich people across the country from day one instead of like, all right, let's get them in here. Let's actually get them trained up on how to be legislators. Then it's why, how many times do you go to one of your committee hearings and there's like you in the room?
Yeah, people are missing.
Right.
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 Yeah.
So there is a lot we could fix if we got the money out of politics.
No question. So let me ask one last question, if we can answer this quickly, because I want to get to something positive at the end for
Okay,
everybody.
I'm here for it.
But dark money in the Supreme Court.
Yes.
You guys have been working on that. Like, just
Yes.
a little bit explain that, because
Ugh.
people are like, well, that's not an election. How
No,
can there be dark money?
it is basically an election.
Yeah.
Leonard Leo runs this group called the Federalist Society. And over the past 10 years or so, they have spent about $1.1 billion in order to stack the Supreme Court with conservative justices. And they have this web of organizations that all are funneling money and doing everything from those fancy trips that we've heard the Supreme Court
Yes.
justices
Yep,
take.
yep.
They fund those. Those lists of judges that are approved to be
Mhm.
nominated to the Supreme Court. They do that. The all the briefs that outside organizations file when a Supreme Court case is going up
Mhm.
that just interested parties are interested in. They fund all of that. And so it's become this massive dark money network. And really, it's a very captured court, right? And part of this is it goes right to reproductive freedom as well, right? They understood that campaign finance rules and regulations were getting in the way of actually being able to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Mhm.
And so they went after campaign finance laws with cases like Citizens United in order to actually be able to create a system where they knew they could get Roe overturned, right? And so it has been a 30, 40-year project to both undermine our democracy and be able to pass these rollbacks of fundamental rights and freedoms like reproductive freedom.
So that's why people just don't think about dark money in the courts. And I just wanted to bring that up very quickly. So
So
let's end it with what can our listeners know about what they can do? And let me say one very, very positive thing that you guys have done. When I got to Congress, I got elected in 2012. I think there were 2 or 3 members of the House that didn't take corporate PAC money.
that's true.
Now, how many are there?
It is about 60 members.
Yeah, that's
60
a
members.
big increase.
Yeah.
And you guys were the ones behind all that. right?
Yeah, and it really is. And thank you for being a leader on this. And it's actually people think about it as the House, but on the Senate side, it's almost half of the Democratic caucus.
Whoa,
It's
really?
42% of the Democratic caucus on the Senate
Wow.
side as well. And this is all about making sure that your voters and constituents know that you're up here working for them,
Yeah.
not for the folks on K Street,
Mhm.
not the big lobbyists, and that your vote could never be bought with a special interest check.
Right.
And so it really is about restoring faith and trust in our government,
Mhm.
because too often right now, voters think, yeah, you're all corrupt, pox on
Right.
all your houses, right? So in the 2018 cycle, we saw this real influx of folks running on not taking any corporate PAC
Mhm.
money. And we've seen it continue to grow over the years. And I think it's really changed the conversation around these issues
Yeah.
here. Look, this is why I have hope. People ask me a lot, like, how I feel about my job.
Yeah.
And one, I say job security,
Yeah.
right?
Which
Well,
I love you, but I hope you don't have.
but like number two, I actually have hope because the people are with us. And we know all Americans, no matter if they're Republican, Democrats, Independents, want the big money out of politics. I think that we have seen a really big sea change on this just in the last 6 or 8 years. And on the Democratic side, the number one bill on the Democratic agenda since 2019 has been a bill to address these issues,
Yeah.
right? And it's passed the House 5 times. We had it within a cinema and a mansion of passing in the Senate,
Yeah.
neither of whom are over there anymore.
Yeah.
So when we get power back, I believe we will pass these reforms, and it will be the most transformational reforms we've seen in a generation. Number two, you and I have both seen this country make incredible changes in a short amount of time.
Right.
You said, I got my start as the first openly gay public official in the state of Kansas. And that was 2004, and that was the year that the anti-gay
Before all
marriage
the
amendments
constitutional amendments.
went across the country. And I thought I would never see marriage equality in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. And 9 years later, I married my wife, and we have a beautiful 8.5-year-old daughter. And you and I both experienced that change. And so I know our country can change toward more equity and justice in a short amount of time. And what your listeners can do, we need folks to help us in this fight, right?
Yeah.
We need you to stand up and to call out the corruption and to demand of all of your public officials that they are serving your interest and not the interest of the special interest. And you are welcome to join us at incitizensunited.org.
That's what I was going to say. Give me any of the other stuff. So ncitizensunited.org.
incitizensunited.org on
What are the
Blue
social-
Sky.
Blue Sky?
I am at Tiffany Muller. And you can find us at In Citizens United on Blue Sky, which is my new favorite platform.
Yep.
I think we're still on that other platform, but I won't even bother giving out the handle. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well-
And we hope we know that what it's going to take is more people in this fight and joining together for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tiffany. I mean, again, your organization's done a great work, and just the positiveness of from 2 or 3 people 12 years ago not taking corporate packet money to over 60 is progress, and we're going to keep making more progress. And thank you so much for you and your organization. And
thank you. This was so much fun.
yeah, it was. And I think people learned a lot. So thanks for listening, and just let's keep fighting for making sure that only people are people.
That's right. Not corporations.
No corporations are people. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.